and today I have a luxury to introduce you Sonia Ghelton, the professor of the Graduate School of Urbanism of Paris, or Paris School of Urban Planning. I'm sorry, that's the
Never mind,
name.
this is translation.
I know that's now the merger of two institutions. One is educational, another one is research institution. It's a big organization that actually is one of the thought leaders in the French urban planning and housing market. So we have been in touch for quite a while already. So, well, Sonia, this is Sonia's second visit actually, right? So to Russia and to Moscow. She was lecturing here a year ago. We are in touch with the School of Urbanism in Moscow, is in touch with Paris School of Urban Planning, and we're planning a lot of interesting programs for the future, well, exchange of students, exchange of professors, etc. So I really enjoy well, Sonia's visit now. It's a week. She has already given a lecture to one of our student groups in the school. Today's topic is density, housing markets, and public policies in European cities. Density is one of the most important instruments in the current urban policy. Well, normally people would be afraid of density, especially here in this country when you have uncontrolled development, and so many of them, many of us actually are afraid of that, and sometimes confuse density with actually uncontrolled development. However, density could be a cure, could be a fantastic instrument to reduce traffic, could be a fantastic instrument to increase comfort and increase financial flows from the urban territory. So this is now the time when I give the microphone to Sonia, and so, well, you will be hearing a lot of interesting stuff about European cities and policies with regards to density in housing markets. Sonia, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexei, and thank you for inviting me, because it's a pleasure to come here. With the snow and close to Christmas, and you're dealing with we have common interest in urban planning and urban studies, and I think very interesting to exchange our point of view. Is it all right? Yeah.
It's not really good. I think, well, that one will be
this
better.
One is better.
Yeah, this is.
But
well,
if
I don't
need
even
to
know
sit,
if you heard me. No.
Yes. So I will be able to get up. Yes, I'm very happy to be here, and I thank you very much for coming and listening to me. Well, it's good you're interested in our subject, even if this subject, as Alexei has just told before, these subjects are common in most of the countries, with an intensity different from one country to another. And I'll try to speak about what's happening in Western Europe, making a focus on what's happening in France. I've chosen the subject because I'm dealing with, is it okay? With urban planning, maybe like this is okay. It's just, okay. Yes, as I'm studying cities, and cities concentrate a lot of people, a lot of housing, even if there's.
Said something wrong. I'm
so
sorry.
Maybe it's.
Maybe like that.
Oh, I can speak louder.
I think it's okay now. Yeah.
It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
I think it's
fine. I was telling that cities concentrate a lot of people, a lot of housing, and I will focus on housing, although cities also concentrate a lot of jobs and offices and activities, and I believe it's not another subject, but it's not the subject I'm going to speak about today. I think the mixture between jobs and people is very important, and it is what characterizes cities now. But let us focus on housing, and I told you that the city concentrates housing, but there's also, as you see here, a lot of empty places in Europe. What all places in white and yellow are not very dense places. It is said that in France, just 10% of the surface area is occupied by people. That means that 90% of the place is empty. So density is not a general phenomenon, but concentration is the issue. The second problem, the second fact is that the population in cities is increasing at a very heavy pace. In dark, you see that here the dark blue cities as known. The population has grown by more than 8% during this period, 2004 to 2014, and that is the very important issue, as we have to manage a city with this concentration and increase of population. It is here I will speak about those cities in red where the population is decreasing. So it's not to say that cities are growing everywhere. We have to think, and it is an important topic and an important issue. We have to think of those cities that are losing population. As you see, in France, we're not much concerned by this phenomenon. It's a German problem. It's said that it is a German problem, but it's not only a German problem. As you say, it is also a Spanish problem, and here in other countries more closer than you, it is a problem, and there's a lot of research about shrinking cities, what we call them. It is necessary to recall that density is not a public is a public objective, but it is not managed by the public, because density is the result of individual choices, which are difficult to control, at least in our countries. And that will be my first point, my first 2 points of why is density a public objective, and I will illustrate the fact that density is the result of individual choice. In point 3, I will underline some consequences of the importance of density and the lack of control of this density in several places. I will give some arguments in favor of density by means of this, looking at these consequences. Then it's, if I have time, I will check the time. I would like to make a point with the developers' position facing density. What do they manage? What do they think about density, and how do they not control but answer the public objective of density? That will be my point 4. And you'll see that in fact developers doesn't like density because they don't earn a lot of money, and that is counterintuitive. So that's why I think it's important to keep that in mind. And when public policies, my last point, public policies try to orientate the market and to densify cities, even if people sometimes don't like density and developers don't want to build in the core of the cities. And in fact, there's not a lot of public policies, but they are trying to implement their objective, and we can discuss the efficiency of this policy. All right. first point, density is now announced as being the thing to reach, the element to reach. We need density in the cities. Why? Two reasons for that. First, because density costs a lot of money to public finance, to public authorities. And next point is because density is a public objective, because there's a collective cost when we don't reach a certain level of density. Public costs are very important. They have been identified in 20 years ago. Maybe you've read this report, The Cost of Sprawl, an American report that underlines how sprawl generates a lot of public costs, mainly because for an additional housing or activity unit, you need to build new roads and new networks, and it costs a lot to local authority, mainly to public authorities and to local authorities in particular. Also, there's an important question of justice, whether you need to give equipment and service to the many people you can, or to each people you want to give the service. And when the city is dense, you can optimize the localization of equipment and services and give the more services to the many. So it is a question of optimization of investment. And last point is consider the service, the public services. And when you have large equipment, you can rationalize your equipment and optimize the operating costs. For all these reasons, maybe for other ones, but for at least those very practical reasons, public authority would like to intensify the city in order to optimize, we say in French, rationalize. It's an announcement in public discourse, rationalize the distribution of equipment and services. In the meantime, density is also an objective in order to optimize social costs, to minimize social costs. First, it has been level, or it is set, it is called by the public authority as a means to revitalize the city center when there's a lack of commerce, where commerce are not working, when there's a lot of vacant space. If you densify the center, you will give more vitality in the core of the city. Secondly, while young people are looking for small apartments in the core of the city, in the city centers, and you may, if you're a student, you may know that quite well. It's very difficult to find a living housing in the city center. Your young people have some reason to go in the city center, and old people have other reason to go in the city center because they can't walk a lot, and they want to be close to shops and services. And in the city center, they won't find a dwelling at the right price. Very often, it is a huge problem. So, public authority would like to densify the center in order to meet the needs of these two groups of people. In several European countries, you've got a lot of historical monuments, monuments, edifices, and preservation of this historical patrimoine is very important. But it's not possible if there's nobody around these buildings. The most people live around the building, the more the decision will be taken with well, it will be easier to spend money to preserve these historical monuments. In the meantime, but maybe this point came later, in the last 10, 20 years, there appears the will to reduce greenhouse gases and emission of and other transport pollution become a very important topic in relationship with congestion. And the density could be a counter-argument to this congestion. This is quite new because congestion is rather new, and the importance of environmental protection is becoming more and more a politician objective. And the last point is linked, but it's in favor of density. The last point is also linked to environmental protection, and it deals with the protection of green and agriculture areas. It has been put on the agenda that land consumption was too heavy because of sprawl, because of urban sprawls, and the need for density would solve part of the problem. These collective objectives have been underlined rather recently in comparison with the the previous objective, and it is becoming very important in the politician discourse to intensify the urban center in order to give an answer to these objectives. In the meantime, density, as I told you before, density is not a public choice, it is an individual choice, and I would like to explain urban density by looking at some photos that illustrate the economic theory that explained how people located in the city. So I won't explain the economic theory of individual choice. Well, it's, as you can see, it's rather old. And all these theory conclude to three conclusions, three main elements. First, the first conclusion is that households prefer the proximity of job, the proximity of activity, and they will prefer then to concentrate, to be close to activities and jobs. And as the room for everybody is small, people would locate close to this job by paying the higher price for the land. And that's why the property price, land price or property price will be very high close to the job, where there's not a lot of place and where everybody wants to go. And the price will decrease when going farther from the center. That's the first point. It's general admitted without difficulties. Second point is that people who want a larger dwelling won't find enough place in the center and would arbitrate between surface and distance from the center. And you will find generally large dwellings in the suburbs and very small dwelling in the center. And the third conclusion of these theories is that density decrease with the distance from the center. And in fact, when we look, I've looked around the European countries and mostly in France, when you look at what's happening in the city, you just can realize that the theory is generally exact. Here you've got places, job places, La Défense in the Parisian region or London cities, and people want to gather around these places and around places where the transport are. Here you've got the new transport, the picture of the transport, urban transport in Paris, and people are gathering in the middle here, where there's a lot of the hub for urban transport. It is the same in Barcelona, but with a very different pattern. I'm going quickly to the pictures, it's just to illustrate this theory. Individual choice claim for density, and the theories say that they prefer large dwellings in the suburbs and small dwellings in the city center. These are real pictures from Paris. And it is the same in Hamburg. Small dwellings in the center, large houses in the suburbs. But what the theory doesn't say, and researchers pointed out that people not only want to be close to work, to jobs, but they want to be close to other people in order to strengthen relationships, and they would like to be close to the powerhouse. Here you've got the parliament in Paris, or to the place where financial decisions are taken in Luxembourg, for example. People also would like to be close to cultural place, to symbolic place. Here you've got the Grand Place in Brussels. Here you've got the National Library in Paris, or this Puerta del Sol in Madrid. People would like to be there because it's a fantastic place to be close to, and they would like to live close to these places and to pay a lot of money to live close to these places. At the same time, it appears that people like green places also. And actually, there are some green places in the city center. And the question will be, will we want to keep these green place in the city center, or will the local authority will build the place? All these conditions give birth to different urban patterns, as you can see. And these urban patterns can be schematized, can be summarized in such with general figures comparing in the European Union and the eastern part, the south part of Europe, the north part of Europe, and the western part of Europe. And you can see that people actually concentrate in large cities. On an average, and in most cases, mostly in the north of Europe, there's a lot of people in the large cities. But these figures also show that there's more than 50% of people that are living in small cities and in rural areas. So not everybody likes the big cities, and quite a lot of people here live in rural area, and a lot of people live in medium cities. This picture is given another illustration of the demographic settlement. In red, you've got places where people come to live in, and you will find the big cities, but also small places. And in France, a lot of places well, there's a lot of people everywhere. I mean, in black, you've got places that where people are living. They're living these places. That means that in Spain or in Germany or here, the people are living place, and there's less and less people. So the concentration of people is not only in the city, but in other places, and some places are not that attractive. Focuses on France. You can see that the concentration in red of population, the concentration of population is actually in the city center. In green, you've got very low density, and this picture shows the importance of suburbanization, concentration of people in the city center, and a very low density all around. But the city center can be quite wide. This suburbanization give birth to different pattern, different picture, different landscape. And here you've got some picture of Brussels in the city center and the suburbs. Rome, the city center and the suburbs. And in Paris, I've just focused on suburban areas, which can be quite different. This is not close to Paris, but this is also in the north of Paris. This is somewhere in the east part of Paris, and I forgot where it was, but it's not, I think it's Melun or Senlis, not very far from Paris. So very different pattern, and sometimes it can be very dense here, it's dense in the middle, although it is far from Paris. And Lyon also. Here you've got a typical pattern of suburbanization in France. The limit of dense cities, which put the several questions, can be summarized here. First, everybody can't locate in the city center because there's not enough place. And actually, our government say there is enough place to build houses, but there is not enough available lands. That means the empty lands, there's a lot of empty lands, empty areas, but these areas are difficult to build on, or people don't want to have some building on these places. So if you want to densify, you have to find available lands. The other problem of density, which have already been pointed out, is congestion, pollution, and scarcity of green spaces. Green spaces which people like, which people want to be close to. And last but not the least, last point is social acceptability of density. And our colleagues, I'm not a specialist of social acceptability, but it is a very important question when we speak about density. We have to know what does density means to people, what kind of density they want, and actually they want some kind of density, but some the urban pattern is very much important, and if you're an architect or a landscape specialist, you can make density acceptable to people, and that's a very important issue now concerning density. As a consequence of these limits and reality of density in the cities, I will point out two consequences on property price and on household segregation. Here again, there's a lot of theory about that, and the reality is not that, doesn't fit exactly to what the theory is telling. The theory is telling, to remember, then that a lot of people want to live in the center and that they will pay a lot in order to live in the center, and as a consequence, prices will get up in the city center. And in Paris, it's exactly what's happening. This has been made by, it is a PhD study made by Marie-Pierre de Belfond. She make this line of equal price. Maybe you've done that. It's quite interesting to join the places where the price are the same. And in red you've got higher price, and in yellow low price. And the highest price are in the center of Paris, here, close to the Assembly. Oh yes, you've got here, close in front of the Eiffel Tower. You've got very high prices. And when you go further from these places, prices are declining. So the theory is good. In Toulouse, it's exactly the same. I don't know if you understand. Here you've got rental prices per square meters. It's quite low in comparison with Paris, but the highest price are in the center of the city, and the low price are in the suburbs. So here again, the theory is exact. In Brussels, I've not checked in all the cities, but in Brussels, it's a study made some years ago by a colleague of mine, and he identified the price, the land price in euro this time, not euro per square meters, but euro, and he pointed out the different price. Here you've got the distance from the center, and here you find exactly the same trend as the theory said. The different points recall to different periods, but even now the difference, the line is just declining with the distance from the center. So in several countries, you've got this illustration of the theory that this theory does work, but in other place it doesn't work. And here you've got another place, Clermont-Ferrand, which is a small, not that small, a middle town in the city, in the center of France. And in that case, it's quite interesting. The city center is here, and in the city center, the prices are very low. It's close to Michelin company, Michelin, which made the I don't know, the tires. And well, the price are not. I mean, this is not the attractivity of the power. People prefer to live here.
And what's there?
Historical, the mountain. It's a hill, and nature. So they prefer to be in this pleasant area, green and not that dirty, I think, because Clermont-Ferrand is not it's an industrial town. And also in that case, the prices are getting up with the distance from the center. Just a counter-example of what the theory is telling us. Yes. Second point, so the theory is not always true, is not always right. Second point, the theory said that, and it's rational, the theory says that as everybody wants to live in the center, but everybody has not the budget for that, the income for that. So the difference in house price is segregative, and the one that wish to live in the center and can pay will exclude the poorest, and the poorest will be rejected in the suburbs. That's the general theory. And as a result, the city center is a place where the rich can live, and the suburbs are the place where the poor don't want to live in the suburbs, but they are obliged to live in the suburbs because they can't pay for the center. And we will look at what's happening if this segregation is working in different countries, and especially in France, looking at the dwelling, demography, and household incomes. These three indicators give a different pattern, a different explanation and vision of what's happening actually in our cities. Concerning the dwellings illustrate quite well the concentration of people in the center, and as long as here in dark blue, you've got the multiple dwelling flats, and their actual flats are in orange. There's a lot of flats in the center of the city, in cities, and there's less flats in the suburbs. So here again, the theory seems to be right. And detached houses are very rare in the centers and quite numerous in the suburbs. That means that the people are not the same in the city and in the suburbs. Those that live in detached house live in the suburbs, and those that prefer to live in the center generally live in flats, small flats. And it is the same in France. Here you've got, this picture is about Europe, an average in Europe. And in France it is the same. We've got more details. In blue you've got apartments, and in yellow you've got the detached houses and single family houses. And naturally, I shall say, there's a lot of flats in larger city and also in the center of medium cities compared with what happens in the suburbs. In the suburbs, you've got more houses and less apartments. When you look at different cities in Europe, you can make the comparison with the cities where there's a lot of flats, Paris, for example, here, and places where there's no or very few flats. In Carvin, I'm not sure you know these places, but you should know because there's Le Louvre, an annex of Le Louvre close to Carvin, and there's also a good football team in this city, but there's no flats. No flats. It's a very small city in the north of France, and it is said by these European statistics that this is the city in France where there's the less proportion of flats. And you find most of the capital here with a large amount of apartments, a large density of people, and very small towns with a low amount or low weight of single house. Does it mean that there is actually a segregation between rich and poor? The story doesn't tell that. Just tell that there's different pattern of dwellings in different cities. Yes. When we look at population, it's quite interesting to see that population rate, population change, is not growing in urban centers here and declining in rural areas here. It doesn't work here. Here you've got the growth in urban center, and here you've got the growth in rural areas. And in most countries, there is an urban growth in the cities and a decline of population in rural areas. So that's what the theory is telling us. But there's quite a lot of cities where the growth of population is equal in urban centers and in rural centers. So what's happening? Why why don't everybody gathered in the centers? There's actually some country where the decline in urban center and in rural areas are effective, but there are not a lot of differences here. So the theory is not that good. And when we look at cities, we identify what we call increased cities with a rate of population very low or even negative here in Spain, in Italy, Greece, and in Germany. So it's interesting to know to understand what's happening in these cities, because the theory doesn't say much, and it is a topic for search now, because to understand what's happening in these cities, and to reconsider the importance of density. Here you've got the phenomenon in France. In red, you've got middle-sized cities and small cities where the population is still growing, and in green, I shall say, or blue, places where population is decreasing. And you see that, well, there is middle-sized cities with a low or negative rate of population growth. Here, they are in the north of France and in the middle of France, and actually, public authorities are worrying a lot about this phenomenon. It's very important. They're afraid to disappear. So it's a very important issue in France. Small cities also are more numerous with a declining growth of population, but it seems not that important in the public discourse. It comes to the question of social segregation. Are these indicators of social segregation or not? When we look at the different model, the theoretical model, we find that there's two different models. The one we call European model, the one we are used to, the one I've just explained before, is a model where rich population gathered in the middle of the city, in the center of the city, and the poorest are excluded from the center and live in the suburbs. And it has, I'm sure everybody has told you, you already know that the American model is supposed to be just on the contrary, poor people living in the center and rich people living in the suburbs. The explanation is said that American people have a very low cost of transport and can travel very easily from their living to the city center where jobs are, and they have a real important will to live in green places. The preference for green spaces seems to be more important in the States than in Europe. In fact, these models are changing, and we can't find, I come to the conclusion, we can't find this European model in most cities in Europe. Looking at the household incomes, this map has been made not long ago, well, 10 years ago, but not that long ago, and illustrate the concentration of revenues of people with high revenue in blue and people with low revenue in yellow. And the theory said that people with high revenue will live in the center, and it is not really the case in France. Of course, here you've got actually poor people, low revenue in the suburbs of Toulouse, low revenues in the suburbs of Bordeaux. But look at the revenues in the Parisian region. Low revenues are in the middle of Parisian metropole. It is not that important. Here you've got Lille, also low revenues are in the center of the city. So actually rich people will live in the suburbs, even in France, according to the American model. It's the same in Brussels. The same colleague, Jean-Marie Halleux, made an relationship between the average income per habitant and the distance from Brussels. And here, close to the center, there's a very wide range of people with very different revenues. And when you go further from the centers, you've got quite high revenues too. Looking at poverty gives another image of what's happening in the cities, first column, and in the suburbs here. You've got the concentration of poor people that can pay a good living, or that could, the ratio is the number of people who spend more than 40% of their income for housing. And these people are said to be overburnt, to be poor. And there's a wide amount of people in the cities, of course, but not that big amount of people in the suburbs. That means that actually there's a lot of poor people in the centers, 30%, 13%, and not that much, 10% in the suburbs. So according to this indicator, well, there would be poor people in the center, and the importance of the share of these people is more important in the center than in the suburbs. And here you've got the rural area. I pointed out Greece, or I can point out Greece, where the amount of poverty is the same in the center and in the suburbs. But in Portugal, it's here. 9% of poor people lives in the city. 9% of the population in the cities are poor, and 10% of the population in the suburbs are poor. So, but in most cases, the amount of poor is concentrated in the cities. So it's difficult to conclude. Is there some segregation between the city center and the suburbs? Well, when we take one indicator or another, we will find different situation. What we can say is that situation is different in different countries. Some colleague, well, I will take the observation of some colleague of mine that say that it's not a good thing to look at the city by itself. You have to look at the city inside a system of city. And I appreciate this kind of analysis. Looking at what's happening between the center and the suburbs is restrictive. And generally, as I've just done, you look at what's happening in house, in revenue, in revenue and poverty, but it's not a good way to analyze what's happening in the cities. You have to analyze a system of flows of revenues, and the idea is that there are places, I will show you maps, there are places where people live and places where people work, and they earn money in these places, maybe La Défense in Paris, the place I've shown you before. They will earn money in La Défense, and La Défense will be a very rich place, but in fact they are spending their money in very far in the suburbs, and the suburbs are living in relationship, in connection with what's happening in La Défense. And so you can't say that the suburbs are rich or poor, or the city center is rich or poor, because the city center will give money to people, and this money will be spent in the suburbs. So we have to look at the system of the city, and the distribution of people inside the city is not that important. What is important to point is the flows of money between one place to another, and the link between money, between the places. And it is the same between, I've spoken about the city, inside the city, and it is the same while things are happening also between cities. Parisian people earns money in Paris and will spend their money in Bordeaux, for example, during the weekend, or because they've got a secondary house, or because they are going on holidays in Bordeaux. And so Bordeaux is very much connected to what's happening in Paris. And when maybe it was a bit quick, but you remember that here there are what we call shrinking cities, very poor cities. But in fact, they're not that poor because they are linked with big metropole, and this big metropole will give money to the poor city. So the poor city, they are not poor, they are just satellites of a big metropole where money is coming out. And this changed the figure, the interpretation of the density between cities. These colleagues, it's called Laurent Davzy and Magali Talandier, they focus on these flows of revenue, and they identify three main flows of revenue that could change the organization of the cities. Okay, here you've got an example on Nantes. Nantes is in the western world, you see, here, in the western part of, here is Nantes. Nantes is a metropole, but for example, here close to Nantes, there is Saint-Nazaire, which is a port, an industrial port, and it is a declining city. People are leaving Saint-Nazaire. There's a lot of empty vacant houses. But when you look at this system of city, you see that here, Nantes, where there's a lot of job. There's a lot of job in Nantes, but there's a lot of housing in Saint-Nazaire. So Saint-Nazaire is the place where the people, the inhabitants, the workers from Nantes spend their money. This is quite well known. But what is not well known is the impact of secondary houses. Here you've got in dark blue the place where inhabitants of Nantes go during the weekend and spend their money in secondary houses, and not the spendings, but also they invest in their house. So they are giving activities to all these places. And all the blue, this influence of Nantes is quite wide. And here you've got I'm not always agree with that analysis, but it's interesting to show. This map shows the place where people going on pension will live. So people previously working in Nantes will leave Nantes when they go on pension, and they will go here and there and even there. And by these flows of revenues, because pensioners have quite a lot of revenues from the state, they can spend money here and give activity to these cities. So my point is, that you don't, when you analyze the cities just by a segmented approach, you miss a part of what's happening in the city. And you have to focus also, I shall say, on the flows of money, not only on the flows of money, but you also have to focus on the flows of money that give sense to a system of cities or give chance to shrinking cities. And in fact, it is not yet proved by proper research, but some shrinking cities have a chance to develop again by means of these phenomena. Some do not have a chance. Okay. I told you I wanted to make a point with the developer's point of view. Maybe it will be a bit technical. I hope I will make it simply enough for you to catch what I wanted to say. Developers, first point, developers would like to increase the density in order to get more money. And if you look at, yes, want to take a photo, I've just make a rough scheme of what's happening to a developer. A developer buy the land, develop the land, build houses, pay public fees, contribution. I'm sure you've got this kind of contribution in Russian cities, and make a profit. 25% of the sale, and they are selling building. That's, I hope it's clear. It's just rough design of the rationale of the developer. When the developer can double the density, he will double his margin. He will sell twice apartment for twice price. He will take his margin, 25%, that is 500 million euro, what if you want. But in order to sell this apartment, he will have to build the apartment, double price. To develop the land, it's not double price to develop high density land. It's, here I put just a bit costly, but not that high. Public contribution will double because 2 points. When you've got double people in a city, you have to build double school classes. So it costs more. And you know, the land is a result of the sale less the cost, and the landowner is very happy because he will get he will be able to ask more for his land. So first analyze, developers are very happy to increase the density on their place because they can earn more money, even if the margin in percentage doesn't change. But what it's in France, there's not a lot of study, but some colleague of ours, he's working in ICAD, which is ICAD is a big promoter, a big builder, and he compared the building cost without land, without developing cost, just the building cost in different situations, in a detached house, for a semi-detached house, for a multi-dwelling with only two floors. Here you've got it's number 4, 3 or 4 floors for apartment. Here you've got from 4 to 8 floors, but a park underneath, 1 level in the basement, yes. And here you've got the cost in Paris for 4 to 7 floor building with 2 levels of parking. 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 2 lev And this is a construction cost per square meters. And it's clear that density is costly for the promoter. And that's, well, quite surprising for us, but in fact it is true. And that's the reason why, yes, do you see that? It's a real picture here. You've got a small house being built, being renovated, and but it is very difficult to bring this to build, so it is costly. And that's the reason why these figures are wrong, because building costs are increasing and the margin of the promoter is decreasing with density. So, second point, density is costly to the promoter, and it's difficult for him to have to keep his benefit. You can say that, of course, he has got here a margin, but he won't be able to buy lower than 50 to the owner. So if the costs are, for example, 1,500, he won't be able to build. He will not come. He will not build the place. And the second point, the third point, is that nobody tells the promoter that he will be able to sell all these buildings. It is not, even if he wish to build high density programs, he will have to keep in mind the acceptability of the market to buy those buildings. And it is not this happens in very few places. The promoters will not be able to sell all these apartments everywhere. So in fact, the promoters will build high density programs in very small places where there's a very high market with people willing to buy a very high price apartment with a very high density, and that is not very common in most of the cities. He will be able to build such a program in the center of Paris, but curiously, can I find my, no, I'm here, a lot of promoter build house here, very far from the center, because people can pay here for what they are building, and it's not very high density. And people there's not a lot of people being able to pay for high density building in the center of Paris. So builders will not always like density. They will select a place where the building costs are not that high, and when there are a good land market where people wish to buy. If places where the land prices are low, the market will not accept high density. In the suburbs, it's not possible to build very dense program. So the builders will not answer the wish of public authorities to densify everywhere, because they know that the market is not responding and that the cost will be heavy. And so sometimes they will do that, and in most places, they won't do that. My last point concerns public policies in favor of density. I hope I make it clear that public policies are willing density for several reasons, but the mean to implement, to push people to build high density buildings are not a lot, are not very numerous. First, well, I realize I forgot the fourth possibility. I will tell you about that after. first general mean is local authority are designing local master plans in order to, in favor of density. And in France, there is a very strong control of local master plan from the government, and the government will not accept local master plans that are not designed in favor of density. They will say to local authority, do your master plan again, we won't accept. And it's quite surprising in France, in a country where decentralization is supposed to be very strong. So now municipalities have got very strong control on the design of their master plans, and they are obliged to design some place where density will be accepted. They are obliged to identify areas where it will be necessary to densify. So here they will, the municipality have to protect green places, but they have to design a master plan. The master plan, I'm sure in Russian and in France is the same. It's just a program. It's not, no, it's just a design, an incentive means to help the people to build where it is good for the collective purpose, but it's not obligation. It's an interdiction. It puts for it place where you cannot do, but it is the master plan can prevent you from doing, but the master plan cannot force you to do. Yes. But the master plan can be incentive, and in several cases, local authority can give an extra potential of density for several reasons. Environmental reasons, if you build good quality, good energetical quality, good environmental quality building, you can build a floor more than what's allowed in other places, for example. And I shall say it's all public policies can do in France. Recently, the government thought that it was not enough in favor of density, because master plans are just incentive and not, it's not obligation. And the government give a reward to the mayor that allow a lot of dwellings in their municipalities. And the amount is quite important, because the government will grant 2,100 euro per dwellings being made in the city. The idea, and it's linked with social acceptability, the idea is that the mayor will not accept a high density of building in his municipality, because people don't want density. And so the mayor will not force people to build. And so he will have what we call a restrictive master plan, where there's a minimum possibility to build, just because population doesn't want these dwellings. And in order to force the mayor to accept more dwelling, even if population is not very happy, and maybe won't elect the mayor afterwards, and because local authority needs money now, well, everybody needs money, and the government will give this amount of money to what we call les maires bâtisseurs, building mayor, building, just to help building mayor, builder mayor, building mayor. We will see the results. And the last measure is to incent, to push people to develop dance program by taxing them if their program is too low, has a too low density. So mayor can implement a tax for people, for builders that choose to build a low density program. Just some picture. The picture is not good because there are so many master plans in France, and it's not really, you can't see a lot. But what generally local authority do is to fix a ratio of land, a maximum ratio of land consumption, and they have to monitor the ratio and to to count the land and to tell the government that there have been good local authorities concerning with that point. They can densify some places according to energy performance or energy production system, and that's quite interesting in France, but in the suburbs. Quite a lot of cities develop wooden system production, energy I forgot the word. It's a collective heating system by means of wood. Energy is coming from wood.
Coal?
Sorry?
You mean from coal or
from wood?
From wood.
Wood. Forest.
Forest.
There's a lot of collective heating system when you put forest, not forest, wood.
Once it was forest, so now it's coal.
No, it's not coal at all. It's not coal, it's forbidden. Timber. Yes. And this is developing a lot in France. Even in urban centers, but mostly in small cities.
Industrial forest.
I can speak about that. No, there of course in big cities, and I think close to Marseille and Avignon, there are very large heating plants with industrial forests. Yes, but the aim is to collect the wood around the city, because they said that if you collect the wood transport, the timber transport is costly, and you cannot, it's not used to collect the wood further than 200 kilometers from the city. The cost, yes, is it clear? So the aim is to push agriculture to bring their waste wood when they cut the hedge to the heating center, and you can collect quite a lot of wood and not timber in that case. It's yes. So this is developing a lot in France. A small heating plant with wood. And also there's a great focus around the metro station. And that leads me to the last point. I forgot to say that one possibility for local and public authority to, in favor of density, is to build infrastructure and to build transport system, because it will help, it's supposed to increase density. But the effect, the impact is not general, and it is argued, it is discussed. Everybody say that transport system will bring people, will bring concentration of people, but the studies could not conclude that this impact is real. Sometimes it is real, sometimes it's not, absolutely not the case, and we've got a lot of railway stations in France with nothing around, a great desert. So the impact of transport on urbanization is still a question, but it could be a mean for local authority to develop density. Here you've got the reward to grid builders. So the figures are very low, I'm sorry for that, but there's not a lot of cities concerned by this measure. Here you've got the 21st region, cities, concerned by this measure. Most of them are in the Parisian region, the blue point, if you can see, the dark point, if you can see them. Romainville, who is here, will get the maximum reward with 1,500,000 euro, which is a lot. And well, very quickly, the reward is not important, and you get the reward once when you build housing, and you won't get the reward next year. So it's one shot measure, and the amount is not very important. But our new government said that he will insist, he will give the money again in next year. Low density taxation, I say it's a flop. There's just 20 municipalities that experiment this measure. So we know why these 20 municipalities implemented the tax. It's because they need money. The total amount of the money collected by the 40 cities in 2014 has been only 13,000 euro. It's not a lot. It's not enough to make a budget, a financial budget. The other reason is density, but well, it's nothing. It's peanuts. This is a tax that could, we'd better stop with this tax. So, just to point out a few questions, public policies in favor of density are not easy to find, to implement. They are costly. They are costly because density required a lot of public equipments and a lot of public services. And the public finance will pay. And until now, we have not found a solution to that. So who will pay? That's a good question to put. If density is required, who will pay the public costs? Second point I wanted to discuss is this acceptability of population. I've already told you before. I think we need some studies and some pedagogy in order to if we want density, population has to accept it, and we have to do things in order to inform population and find some ways. And the last point, and actually I'm trying to develop a research program on this question, is the result of, I've told you that there's a lot of vacant places in the city, and these vacant places are really good opportunities to densify the cities. But maybe not. Vacant sites are very costly to develop, and they could be necessary in the process of urbanization because you can't fill up a city. You need to have some time to build and time to destroy. So the time of the cycle of life of a city requires some vacant land. So it's no use to fill everything because you won't have time for everything. And also, vacant land could be seen as a necessity to make density acceptable, because it's pleasant to have green places inside the city. Walking in Moscow, I've seen that some buildings have been destroyed, and we can breathe in the city. Even in a dense city, you need some place to breathe. And so the question of building in these infield places could be an issue, is something we have to think about for the next years. Thank you very much for listening all that.
Any questions? Please.
Can we use microphone?
Yeah. I'll give it to you.
Oh, this one is working very well.
First of all, thank you for coming in Moscow for your speech. Very interesting graphics. So, I have a question about models. You told us about European model and American model, and for your opinion, which of these models are suitable for Moscow? Because if you know, we have too expensive apartments in the city center, and also too high costs for land in Moscow suburbs, and you will have a bad transport situation. So, which of these models are suitable? And second question, where do you prefer to live, in the city center or in the suburbs? Thank you.
Well, I prefer to live in the suburbs, so actually. But the model is not something you decide. The model is something you can observe. It refers to preference of people. And if I prefer the suburbs, you will prefer the center. And it's all the mixture of individual preference that will build the model. The model is not something that you just implement, and you can't force people. Second point, and when we compare the European theoretical model and the American theoretical model, the influence of transport is very important. The transport cost is very important. And for example, in Paris, we have now a very heavy congestion cost in public transport. So people are, this is, the segregation between the center and the suburbs is really a result of this transportation cost. If this mobility cost is decreasing, a lot of people could live wherever they want. And I found Moscow very easy to travel in, so maybe the city of Moscow could develop according to the American model, I don't know. But there's a lot of traffic too. Urban transport seems very more convenient than they are in Paris, but maybe it's because I take the urban transport in Paris every day in the morning, and it's that, like that. And in here, well, it's a pleasure to be here, not in this stream.
Okay, the lady over there, and then you. Okay.
Well, thank you a lot. It's been a, well, I would say, profound quantitative analysis.
I'm sorry, too much. Maybe.
But you know what I would be interested is actually qualitative side of density. I think what's happening in Europe now is actually rethinking of density and some change in approach to density. So, for example, in France and in Switzerland, do you observe any, you know, maybe radical approaches to density, such as, you know, incremental housing or co-housing, those kind of things? Do you see any of these examples in large cities like Paris?
Yes, things are changing. Actually, yes, but they do not concern a lot of people. But they are changing, and our students are in the School of Paris. They are working on that subject. more students are working on that subject, and as they will be our future developers and urban planners, they will be able to do something. The mentality is changing, the social acceptance of sharing flats is changing too. It's not, well, it depends on the place. It is changing in large metropole. It's not changing in middle-sized cities. We see a very strong difference in the mentality, in the culture. So things, yes, you can, it does happen. For example, 2 years ago, we just think of what could be done in a very rich part of the suburban area in the south of Paris, where there maybe the picture I've shown you, a small village with a lot of green places, and people will not want density, and the students try to design some kind of density, and to speak to, you have to design acceptable density, and to speak to people, to have a pedagogy, and to find ways, so it will come. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much for the lecture. It was really very interesting. My question concerns maybe Parisian mentality about density. Because in Moscow we have suburbs which are rather dense in population, and developers build mass housing, which is really very dense and very high rise, something like 30, 25 floors. It's high rise for for the suburbs. And what about Paris? Or Paris mass housing, maybe in the suburbs?
We had a terrible experience of mass housing in Paris, in the suburbs. And now we are, I shall say, very bad consequences of these programs, with a lot of criminality, a lot of drug, a lot of everything bad. And since 10 years, we decided to destroy this building, part of this building, and to make density different. An important point I want to make is that in France, this high program was not very dense, so there is room inside. Maybe you remember this photograph. It's typical because it is the place where there's a lot of incivilities and riots and all that, just as in Marseille. Up, no. I miss it. And we no longer do here. But there's a lot of, it's not that dense in France.
No.
And but it's typical of what we've made in the suburbs. And we destroy here, they've destroyed several bars and put some small not houses but buildings in front of. So the idea is to lower and to densify, but without a high level of buildings.
And modern housing is also tending to be low-rise.
No, modern houses?
Yes, like modern housing. You are speaking about the program which was 10 years ago and so on. And what about the modern situation?
And now I think the objective is to build not more than 10 levels, 10 floors. But of course it depends. And Paris doesn't like very high buildings.
Okay, thank you.
So, but in the suburbs, I think it's, well, the social impact of this situation is that bad. But well, not any mayor will allow such that. It's terrible. Maybe in Marseille, the police can't come into the place. It's for us.
What is the name of it?
The last question, right?
Thank you. Thank you for your lecture, and it was. I really appreciate the most holistic overview of the contemporary suburban and urban development in France, and especially in Paris. But I was extremely interested in one particular moment you featured. It is an issue of that now it is obligatory by law to make that the new master plans for the communities should be more dense than they were before, and they have to mark the places that were should be even more dense. Actually, what is the criteria to evaluate that it is dense or enough or not, and who actually does that? Can you get a bit deeper into the procedure of how the decision is made?
A very good question, thank you. But I'm afraid I'm not a very strict answer. Maybe a colleague in law would be better than me, but I'm not sure that we have some rules for everybody. I know that the master plans are looked by in what we call prefecture, in the state authority. And I think, well, I can say that the ratio between land consumption and building lands, the evolution of the ratio is looked at, but we don't have exact number not to be over. So actually it can change from one place to another. It can change from one man or woman to another. We are not a centralized country, we are a decentralized country, and when the government implements such rules, it has to look at the context. And also, I shall say that the one that is not seen is not punished. Yes? It's not exactly the good translation.
All right, thank you very much. I guess we are running out of time, so it's a bit of a character building exercise for the library staff because they're pressing us. So, but anyway, thank you very much for a wonderful lecture. This is very interesting and so lots of insights. And for myself, I have a lot of questions, but I will continue tomorrow. Thank you very much, Sonia.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm sorry, my English is still to be improved.
So, the subject is perfect.
Yes.
Perfect.
It is. The restitution is next week. So about consumption, they focus on this, and we argue that well, we need some space, but there's a way to speak about this subject. It was quite interesting to do. Also.
Here we are dealing a lot with density issues, so it's leverage as well. The definition is varies from one person to another, so one against the other.